Continuing on Nefesh HaChayim, Perek Dalet, we started Sha'ar Dalet, speaking about the fact that after he spent a lot of time knocking at this concept of Torah Lishma being the Vekud, and saying a lot of Tehillim and going to a lot of Tevilas, and parallel to this we hinted to what Rabbi Shlomo also mentions when he speaks about the concept of Chassidut. He says a lot of Chassidut in the people's mind is the Vidot Kerach, going to ice and Gilgul Sheleg and so on and so forth. So after he knocked all that and established that Limud Torah Lishma means simply as it says, Lishma means L'Shem Torah, to have a dedication to knowing Torah, to knowing the whole of the Torah, right? He brought the Gemara in Sukkot of Kafchet of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, that he knew all of the aspects of the Torah. There was nothing that he left unknown. There is no stone that he left unturned. And he says, because you got to know it. And we mentioned that the Midrash says this clearly, that they ask you all of the details of the Torah. Have you learned it? Did you spend time in Maaseh Merkava and all the details? After they're done with Mikra, Mishnah, Talmud, and the Sodot Torah, they want you to know even Maaseh Merkava, Maaseh Bereshit. So based on a person's level. So that he established. Now he says, but I'm not trying to tell you that you don't need Yirat Shamayim, Chas v'Shalom. Without Yirat Shamayim, actually nothing is worth, right? We mentioned the Gemara in Shabbat Lamed Aleph, where Rava says Chaval is a vase where a person has al delet le darta v'tar'a le darta avid. Someone that doesn't have a house and he's making a gate for a house. So Yirat Shamayim is like the house itself. He's making a gate. It's the Torah is making the gate. Yirat Shamayim is the house itself. In a different note, the Gemara says that it's like somebody that doesn't have the key to the outside door, but has all the keys to the inside rooms. Well, he can't go in. Behe ayil, the Gemara says. How are you going to go in? You don't have the main master key. So that's what he's going to be focusing on. He brings now a Zohar. In Haktamad Zohar, Amar Rashbi, Shehayir'a ihi tar'a le'a'ala lego mehemnuta, that the yir'ah of a person, Yirat Shamayim, is like a gate, an opening way that the person enters mehemnuta. Simply translates to the Torah. Really, the Chida writes on his Perush on Iyov, he says that mehemnuta is always a reference to the Torah. So if you go with the Chida, really Zohar is saying exactly this, that Yirat Shamayim is a gateway to the Torah. You can't have real Torah if you don't have Yirat Shamayim. So that's the Chida in Sefer Nachal Eshkol, which is a Perush on Sefer Iyov. The truth is, Zohar writes also in Bereshit. This is the Hakdama of Zohar that the Rabbi Chaim Volozhiner quotes here. But Zohar writes in Bereshit, in Daf Nun Tet, in Nun Ched Nun Tet, writes that the person that doesn't have Yirat Shamayim, you could almost say that he is not fit to have a chelek in Alma De'ati, in Olam Haba. It's very strong language of Zohar. You have Yirat Shamayim, you have everything. You don't have Yirat Shamayim, you have nothing. You're not fit for having a chelek in Alma De'ati. And that's the languages are elsewhere. Now, his Zohar is not yet finished. He says, Ve'al pikuda da itkayem kol alma. On this command of having Yirat Shamayim, the whole world stands on this. Veda ikara v'yesoda lekol shar pikudin doraita. This is the foundation of everything else in the Torah. Now, really, you have to explain this because the Gemara says in Makot of Chaf Dalet, Gemara says a series of summarizing the important mitzvot. You have 613, so you could summarize, not summarize that the other ones are not important, but the pillars that the whole Torah stands on, maybe to 12, maybe to 3. And the Gemara says, Ba Habakuk ve'emidan alechad. Habakkuk came and said all of the 613 mitzvot, Torah mitzvot, stands on one major pillar. The core of all of the mitzvot is Sadik ve'emunato yechya, which seems to indicate that emunah is really the main thing. But I think the answer is not really a stira. It goes hand in hand. When a person has recognition of Hashem, the more emunah you have, the more yirat shamayim you have. You see, we say in tefillah, bitchilu urchimu, urchimu utchilu. Starts with fear of, yirat onesh. And yirat Hashem itself has two aspects. One is that, simply having fear of, being punished, having to stand the consequences of your deeds. And doesn't mean that Hashem is standing to punish anyone. It means just you do it, there's consequences for it. You create a certain shefa, or you stop a certain shefa, and thereby follows a ripple effect of things, and something gets stopped, or something happens. Something negative gets created. The Ramchal explains this at length of how negativity is created in the world, and that is Yirat HaOnesh. Then you get to Ahavat Hashem. So it's Bitchilu Urchimu, but then Urchimu Utchilu. After the levels of Ahavat Hashem, loving Hashem, coming to recognize Hashem, you have a higher level of Yirat HaRomemut, which is no longer, now I'm afraid that something bad is going to happen to me. How can I do it? The awesomeness of Ribbon Shalom, I understand. I can't bring myself to do it to him, right? Imagine if someone would want to slap Chacham Obadia. Well, slap him back when he slaps you, right? It's not that he's going to hit you or something, punish you. You're not going to, you're awe-stricken, right? You're not going to do it. Not because you're afraid of him, but because you stand in awe of whoever it is that you're in, it's in that level for you, Chawadia or Rabbi Yashiv or Shalom. That is Yirat HaRomemut. Indeed, it's not the time for it now, but Rambam seems to indicate each one of them in a different place. In Sefer HaMitzvot, in Mitzvat Aseh Dalet, Rambam writes that the mitzvah is the mitzvah of Yirat Hashem. He talks about Yirat Hashem as being the fourth of the positive commandments, and he says the explanation of it is to be afraid of onesh, to be afraid of a certain built-in fear of there is going to be consequences. But in the Yad HaChazaka, in the actual Mishnah Torah, in Chod Yesodei Torah, I think in the very beginning of Perek Bet, Paracha Aleph, he writes that the mitzvah is to have Yirat HaRomemut, right? To ponder about it and to understand the awesomeness of Hashem. Thereby, you will be stopped from doing anything wrong. In elsewhere, Rambam in his letters and his teshuvot, he also writes that Yirat HaOnesh is a very basic, simple, and not wanted level. This is only fit for people of damaged intellect and the simple Pshutei Ha'am. It's not really the main mitzvah of Yirat Hashem. So, to me, it seems that he's saying there's certainly a mitzvah to fear Hashem. But what he really wants from you, right, is like the pasuk says, "V'ata Yisrael ma Hashem Elokecha shoel mimach, ki im liyira et Hashem Elokecha u'la'ahava." You have to fear Him. You have to love Him. U'la'alechet b'chol mitzvotav, l'shmor mitzvotav, la'alechet b'chol derachav l'shmor mitzvotav, u'dovkabu. You have to go in His path and do all the do's and the don't do's, but then attach yourself to Him. So that's a level of Yirat HaRomemut. There's no longer the petty thing of, I'm going to not do this because my business, Hashem is going to punish me in my business. Or that's also part of a good thing to have, right? Sometimes I think to myself, halvai people will have that actually. It's like the Gemara says that when Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was passing away, his students asked him, says, give us a bracha, final moments. It's the bracha of Rebbe. And he said, Yiratzon, Shiyeh Mora Shamayim Alechem Kemora Basar V'Dam. You should fear Hashem as much as you fear people. And he said, that's it? He was like, we were expecting some, high level, heavy duty. He says, no, halavai. He says, even this, halavai, you should have it. Because look at what the reality of the world is. The reality of the world is that a person that does an avera looks around to make sure no one's, nowadays they look up to see the cameras, right? Looks around to make sure nobody's seeing him, and then he does something that's wrong. If you would look around and see that Hashem is always there, and your yirat Hashem would be the same as yirat basar v'dam, you would never sin, right? That's what the Gemara says. You become a shoteh at that moment. En adam over avera ela im ken nichnas bo ruach shtut. You don't do any averot unless, at that moment, you lose your mind, right? And the Gemara learns it from actually this passage's parasha by Isha Sota, right? It's written with a sin, which is shota, crazy, because a person only does that type of a thing when it's nichnas bo ruach shtut, when they're not thinking about the reality of the world. But be that as it may, that's the language of Zohar. Man de natir yira, natir kola. If you have yirat shamayim, you have everything. Lo natir yira, lo natir pikude oraita. You don't have yirat shamayim, you have nothing. You're not going to keep anything, right? The prime example of it is from Avraham Avinu. I says, well, why didn't you tell me that this is your wife? And he says, well, ki amarti rak en yirat Hashem b'makom hazeh v'haraguni al devar ishti. Because I thought they don't have yirat Hashem in this place, and they're going to kill me because of my wife. Right? So now think about this. They're going to kill him because they are gidurim ba'arayot. Because they don't want to, in open, go marry a eshet ish. So what are they going to do? They're going to kill him to marry the wife. How absurd is that? You're going to do one of the three Gimel Chamurot, not to do the other one of the Gimel Chamurot. Everyone understands that the killing is. So Elamai, you know what it means? To me, it seems it means there is never shortage of excuses to kill someone. We have to be very careful how we speak about Avot HaOlam, but really the mashma'ut of the Psukim and the Chazal about David HaMelech, the story of Uriah Hitti and Bathsheba, his wife, is this very same thing. The Psukim explicitly mention, if this is in Shmuel Bet, in Yud Aleph Yud Bet, that David HaMelech chose Bathsheba as a wife. Of however this story went, and you have to understand that, to just reiterate the fact that we can't really speak or think about David HaMelech or any of those types of Tanakh figures like the way human psychology works nowadays. The Gemara says in Ketuvot Tav Zayin, Kol ha'omer David chata'eh lo to'eh. If you think David HaMelech sinned, you're making a mistake. Now, how to justify the punishment and all that? Obviously, Hashem was very unhappy with him. That the pasuk says, right? Vayira b'nei Hashem. After he had a child with her, after he killed, well, it's not so pashut actually if he killed him or not. Malbim, the way Malbim learns the whole psukim there is, when he sent to Yoav to put him in the front lines and then back up, already Uriah was killed. Before the messenger, before this really actually gets to Yoav had put him together with with a group of people, and they were attacked, and many people died, and Uriah also died. So it didn't happen like David HaMelech. It already had happened. So in other words, Hashem wanted this to happen, but David HaMelech jumped the gun, right? So again, that's not our topic right now. But what happened was, he found enough reason why Uriah Hitti would be Chayav Mita. Right? Here's Morad B'Malchut, however you slice that. if you don't have that awareness, there are going to be enough reasons to justify just about anything, right? You could kill people, you could steal and cut corners, and the language of Zohar is pretty strong. Lo natir pikuda oraita. It's not going to keep. If you don't have yirah, you're not going to be keeping anything. Anything that you don't want to keep, you'll find. You have to have yirat shamayim. So that he says is a core. Uparashat Behar, another piece of Zohar here, and Daf Kuf Chet Amud Aleph, he quotes, "My ol malchut shamayim ela kahai Torah." Zohar says, what does it mean accepting ol malchut shamayim? The yoke of malchut shamayim is like an oxen, like a cow. That you put the yoke on it, and it first, in order to be able to work, it has to accept it. They put it from infancy, so to speak, from a young age, on the calf, to not be a rebellious ox when he grows up. It should not become something difficult. So the Zohar says, that first you have to accept all malchut shamayim before you do any of the mitzvot. And afterwards you could do the mitzvot that are needed to be. If you don't accept that yoke of yirat shamayim of Hashem, you cannot do avodah. You cannot serve Hashem. And it says, Ivdu et Hashem be'ira. That's why it says, Ivdu et Hashem be'ira. And Zohar is learning pshat in the pasuk that he cannot have Ivdu et Hashem if there is no yira. Right? Ma'u be'ira. What is yira? Like we say, Rashid Chokhmah yirat Hashem. Right? The beginning of yira is Chokhmah. Chokhmah is yirat Hashem. And we mentioned the way Shlomo Melech says it, and David Melech says it is different. David Melech says, Rashid Chokhmah yirat Hashem. And Shlomo Melech is saying, Tchilat Chokhmah yirat Hashem. And the Maral, in Netivot Olam, in Netiv Yira, he explains the difference is, Rashid is even stronger, there's Tchilah and there is Rashid. So Rashid is the first of many things. You want to start the acquiring of other things, you have to have Yirat Hashem first. Techila is used for something that's continuous, is one thing, right? For Bikurim, you say Reshit Bikurat Matchat Habibet Hashem Elokecha. So the first, fruit that you take is not everything. It's not attached to other fruits. It's one single, separate thing, but it's its own thing. For a path, for something that's continuous, is one piece. You don't say Reshit, you say Tchila. So he's coming to emphasize that the Chokhmah with Yirat Hashem is the same thing. You can't even have Chokhmah without Yirat Hashem, because that is the beginning of this piece. Chokhmah it doesn't even stand on its own. So those are the two elements of Yirat Hashem, based on the way Maral understands it in Netivot Olam. Ve'amru od. Now the Mishnah in Avot says, this is in Per Gimel Mishnah Yud Aleph, Kol she'irat cheto kodemet lo chokhmato, chokhmato mitkayemet. If you have yirat chet, and that is first before your chokhmah, then chokhmato mitkayemet. Then you could establish your chokhmah. Ki yirat Hashem techilahi ikar hakiyum shel chokhmat Torah. That is the main thing of establishing chokhmat Torah. If you don't have yirat shamayim, it's not going to stay. You see this concept with a person's devekut to Hashem. As we mentioned before, Uldov Kabo means Yirat Harumud. If you're attached to Hashem in that way, so the neshama of a person is dominant. And thereby, the neshama never forgets anything. Like Sefer Chassidim says, a person after Ma'avesim is going to remember all his limud. How to fit that with different Gemarot of Rabbi Shlomo Levi and other Amoraim asking for 30 days before their Ptira to chazer everything that they learned. That's a separate issue. But nevertheless, You're going to remember because the neshama never forgets anything. The forgetting is the function of guf. Forgetting is a function of guf. And therefore, in Luchot Rishonot, when they had said Na'aseh v'nishma, and Chazal say Paska zu amatan, when they said Na'aseh v'nishma, the level of neshama was elevated to Adam HaRishon before the chet. So now who's dominant? The neshama is dominant. That's why Chazal tell us, Hayu lomdim v'lo hayu shochim. They were learning and they would never forget. Anything you learned in the level of the Madrigav, Luchot Rishonot, you would never forget. And after they messed up with Egel HaZahav, which was again wanting something tangible, wanting to dominate your sechel over your emunah, which is the same thing that Adam HaRishon and Chava did, right? Nechmad ha'etz laskil. I want to be smart. Hashem says, no, it's kind of like outsmarting the system of emunah, and that's exactly what they did. Moshe said, I'm coming down. He said, it doesn't make sense with our cheshbon. And they went with their sechel over their emunah. That's when the flip happened. Now the madriga of neshama being the driver was changed. Now it became the passenger. The guf is the main dominant force. So now you forget, because the guf is the dominant force. Now hence you have the Gemara in Megillah Daf Vav. The Gemara says, Im amar lecha adam, if someone tells you Yagati v'lo matzati al tami, says I've worked hard, I didn't find, I didn't learn Torah, I couldn't find. That's actually the Gemara itself explains. Al tami, don't believe it. Lo yagati umatzati, I didn't work and I found. Al tami, don't believe it. Yagati umatzati, if I worked hard and I acquired it, then you could be ma'amin. And then the Gemara says hanimili, right? This is, the Gemara has a stage in the middle. I'm skipping. It says this is for learning Torah, but for le'uk megirsa, to remember siyata d'shmael. Siyata d'shmael. To remember, you need to. What does it mean siyata d'shmael? It means the Torah does not stay with it. The Torah is davar ruchani. To establish kedushat Torah, the level of kedushat Torah, it's a davar ruchani, and that does not fit with a physical body of a person. You need a spiritual help in order to maintain it. That means a spiritual help that your neshama should be dominant, post the level of luchot rishonot, right? When we lost that level. And that same thing even for Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was learning and forgetting before the Luchot were given, right? Until the 40th day, at the end, Hashem said, okay, nitan lo b'matana. And the Chazal Darshan say, why is it midbar matana? When he counts the stopping points, the 42 stopping points of the nation throughout the wilderness in the 40 years, it's midbar matana. Chazal say, kol ha'oseh et atzmo hefker kemidbar. The Torah is nitan lo b'matana. If you make yourself hefker, it means your body is like hefker. It's like a midbar. Midbar has nothing. So if you nullify that aspect of physicality, and it doesn't mean that you're not sleeping, you're not eating. It means that you focus to maintain the main dagesh on your ruchniut and not on the gashmiut. Then nitan lo b'matan. Then Hashem gives. That's the siyata d'shmaya that the Gemara is speaking in the Vav in Megillah. Okay, we went on a little tangent, but this is the aspect of Yirat Shamayim. When you have Yirat Shamayim, the Torah is mishtamer, the Zohar HaKadosh says, and the Mishnah says the same thing here in Mishnah Yud Aleph Per Gimel, that if you have Yirat Chet'o kodemet lechochmato, then chochmato mitkayemet, then your chochmah stays with you. Ki Yirat Hashem techila hi ikar hakiyum shel chochmat Torah. Chmo she'amru, and this is the other half of the Gemara in Shabbat that we mentioned before. We mentioned the Gemara in the beginning of a person that has no Yirat Shamayim. That's like having the gate without the house, right? And the Gemara also mentions that they ask you all of the things that you have to learn. And even if you had all of them, says the Gemara, va'afilu hachi im yirat Hashem hi otzaro in ilav lav. If your main treasure house is yirat Hashem, then yes, you get to olam haba. Ilav lav. If not, no. Which is a pretty scary comment. So this is the second half of that, in the same place, in the same daf. The Gemara says, "V'haya emunat itecha chosn yishua." This is not quoting the whole pasuk. The Gemara there learns from this pasuk. There's 6 elements. Emunah is zeraim, itecha is moed, and so on and so forth. All the shisha starim of Mishnah in this pasuk that a person has to learn, and then at the end, Chashiv leBazah pasuk kol hashas. He includes all of the shas shisha sidrei Mishnah in this pasuk. Umesayem, and then he ends va'afilu hachi yirat Hashem hi otzaro. And even with all of that you acquired and mastered, all of shas, all of Torah shebal peh, yirat Hashem hi otzaro. The treasure house is yirat Hashem. The ma hakatuv et Torah the rav tfuot. The example that the pasuk is giving is like produce. V'hayirah le'otzar. If you have produce without the otzar, without a silo, without a place to preserve it and keep it, then what's going to happen? You're going to lose all of it. Animals come and eat it. They trample on it. They dirty it, and the wind comes and the mold and the weather elements and so on and so forth. All of it you're going to be losing. It's the same as with the Torah, that if a person does not have Yirat Shamayim, you could have tremendous amount of tevuah, of produce, of Torah, all the Shisha Starim, but to say it's worthless is pretty much what Chazal tell us. Because again, maybe I didn't make it clear, because Ahava is sandwiched between the two. Even though that Yirat HaRamud is really what Hashem wants, but it has to start with first Yirat HaOnesh, with Yirat Hashem, and then Ahava, and then he elevates to the highest level of the Romemut of Hashem. Yeah, and again, the way Chazal say is that you need both Yirah and Ahava, because if you only have Yirah, then it's not a relationship, it's fear only. And if you only have Ahava, you're going to kick. It's like too chodemli, it's like too open, and it's not a king, it's Avinu Malkenu. It's both of them.
Why is it that the beginning level and the end level is here up in the middle of that? Do you think that the equal levels are equal? Why is here at the highest level? Maybe I'm not understanding exactly.
So again, think to yourself, if you want to make it a little bit tangible, the examples that we gave. So fear you have from any source of power. You could hate the gods of the king, but you're going to behave because you want your head on your shoulders, right? But then you have the example of Harvel Yashav Chacham Badia. It's not the fear. The awe and respect that you have comes from the fact that you really love this person. It starts like that. You admire them. You admire them, and therefore you admire them so much that if anything would go wrong, right, you would be so embarrassed if you don't live up to the standards that you think you should have, the expectation that you think you should be there. Even though there's no punishment necessarily, there's no consequence necessarily, it's just that I don't want to mess up my relationship, right? A couple that's engaged, they don't want to mess up the thing because, chas v'shalom, if I say something, or I do something, when there's a delicate and very precious relationship, you don't want to mess it up. The more precious it is, the more you're afraid. Think to yourself, you have the largest diamond, and there's a little dirt inside. You have to, poke a hole and take it out. right? So, if you don't know how precious, actually a story like that, I'm not sure if it's correct, or it's really a true story. I was told this as a true story, that a diamond dealer, a very big diamond dealer, was presented by a very, very clear and large diamond, but the problem was that inside of it was something that had to be fixed, that was taken out, and nobody wanted to buy this because of that, because they're afraid whoever you would give this to any of the workers there, they would know that this is worth millions of dollars. They would mess it up. The hands would shake. So this Pikeach bought it for very cheap. So what did he do? He gave it to a fellow that had just started interning, basically learning the things. He was good at what he did, but he was not familiarized with the prices, with anything. So very nonchalantly, he walked over to him. He said, I need this in 5 minutes. Just go in, take this out, and give it to me right away. And he said, sure. I put it there and did it. And then he said, if I would have given this to anybody else, they would mess it up. Even though they have 10 times the experience of this person, but they know what this is worth. And the fear of messing up would not let them operate properly. That's a fear of messing up. It's not, how can I mess up? That comes from realizing the value, which brings love. I mean, in chronology, that would be exactly how it would happen. Yeah, Kirat Hashem is, again, Rambam there in the Yesodei Torah that I mentioned to you. He says, Ketzat haderech la'avato v'yirato. How do you have a path to his Ava and Yira? So when you ponder, you think about the amazing awesomeness of Hashem and everything that's there. You can't not love Him. How everything that He's created and the organization of how it operates all together and all of that, it is an awesome thing, and you'll come to love Him. And you have to obviously be wanting to see that. Otherwise, my Shishwa used to say, the scientists, they spend their whole life in the lab. Most of them are atheists. What happens to Rambam? So Rambam, if you pay attention, Rambam says, if you want to see what's the derech, if you're seeking the Kibbutz Elokim, then you'll be elevated with thinking and wondering about how amazing it is. Otherwise, you just pass by it and you won't recognize it. I mentioned once before that even in the science nowadays, if you think about the numbers even of just the statistical chances of the world having come by itself, it is so overwhelmingly small that it at least, even if you don't want to call that proof, at least it turns the tables on anyone else that wants to argue otherwise. Because I mentioned the book Just Six Numbers is authored by Martin Rees, one of the foremost scientists of this generation alive now. One of the 6 numbers that he discusses is this very thing: the statistical chances of the theory of what they call Big Bang, which again Ramban explains the same thing, that it was a Homer Hiyuli in the beginning and was expanded. The only difference is we believe that this Homer, this mass, was created and it was expanded by Hashem's will, not by just a random bang. So he says if it was a random bang, the chances that it would create a platform for universe is so low that it would blow your mind away. The number is, we don't appreciate this number. He says something larger than 10 to the power of 1 over 10 to the power of 100. Now, if you would want to pick one grain of sand in the whole world, and you have the depth of the seas and all the beaches and all the earth and dirt, and you want to know what's the statistical chance of someone guess it the right way, would be 1 over 10 to the power of 23. And every one that you add is 10 times more. So these are things that Rambam is talking about. You think about these things and you feel like a small little nothing. And Hashem says, anywhere that you mention my name, I come to you and I bless you. This is an unfathomable idea that Hashem, with His greatness, and when a person really internalizes this and it becomes from the level of knowledge it becomes to a reality, that's the moment that it clicks. The Ava, and thereby the awesomeness of Yirat HaRomimut. Okay, let's finish this parak at least. If you don't have the kli, if you don't have the otzar, where are you going to put them? You're going to put them on the field. The Torah is the same way. When you have amassed a tremendous amount of Torah, if you don't have the kli for it, if you don't have the otzar, the treasure house, that you lock it up and you keep it safe, it's going to be destroyed by shor v'achamor, the physicality of a person. It does not stay for you. What HaChayim once told me, I used to learn with him for several years in his home, and he mentioned that Moses Mendelssohn, the founder of Reform movement, he was a frumiyad. He kept all the mitzvahs. He actually authored a perush on Chumash that if you would read it nowadays, you would find nothing wrong with it. Indeed, he said that Chatam Sofer, who was the foremost fighter against the Reform movement, with tooth and nail he fought. Once he was visiting one of his students that became a rav of a small shtetl somewhere, and he saw on Shabbat morning he was darshaning from this sefer. He said, "You know who wrote this?" That's how good it was. Even Talmud of Chatam Sofer did not find anything wrong with it. It was something he was using for his, chomer l'drasha. But all of his children, all, and his disciples, all, they went off and married Goyim. How is it possible? Such a flip like that. Because if there's no Yirat Shamayim, the Torah doesn't do what it's supposed to do. It's not mitkayem. Mitkayem doesn't mean that the guy is going to forget everything. No, you could have a scholar that's very scholarly, very, very smart, and he would have it, but there's no continuity in that Torah. There's no kiyum. Not sure if I should say this, but it has a certain level of to'elet. My Rashiva Zatzal, Weinberg, was a gaon, well-known genius in the Ulama Torah, and he wanted to go debate when he was younger, and when he enthusiastic about this issue, wanted to go and debate a certain very well-known conservative rabbi, very scholarly fellow, and he took the biggest gaon in the yeshiva to go with him. So he went to ask his father-in-law, Rashiva Zatzal Ruderman, and he told him not to go. But he insisted he wanted to go. I said, fine, go. I don't think it was a good idea, but go. And he went, and they came back. So Ruderman said, what happened? He said, he made a shmata out of us. That's it. The guy wasn't, again, the yeshivas don't focus necessarily on the writings of Geonim and this and that. It's not like it's a different methodology than the scholarly research-based things that they do in the universities and this fellow was a very talented scholarly mind that had researched a lot of things. But where is he now? Rav Weinberg is alive in the hearts of many, many thousands of people, and is always going to be his impact there. But the kiyum of that Torah that was with this person is gone. It's somewhere, maybe somewhere buried in the thick pages of history books. So that's what the Chazal mean, that it doesn't have any kiyum. The person learns, he knows Pesukim, he knows Halachot, he knows Agadot, he knows all the aspects of the Torah. If he doesn't have Yirat Chet, he's got nothing. Mashallah, Adam is like the he's talking about Yirat Chet here. Really, Yirat Chet is a little bit maybe even different. Generally speaking, we translate Yirat Chet as Yirat HaOnesh, right? But really, it's a little bit different in HaChayim Shlita, Rabbi Kanievsky, in his Musar work, or Chod Yosher. He has a whole chapter on Yirat Chet, If you study, you see he actually has a definition for this really different than the regular terminology that we use for Yirat Onish. But nevertheless, if you don't have, however you slice the element of Yirat Shamayim here that's mentioned, then you don't have anything. And he says the person that says Yeshli Elef Mitzvah, continuation of the Midrash Rabbah in Shemot that he mentions here, the person says, I have thousands of pounds of tevuah, of produce. Amal eshtacha apotkaot liten lotam bahem. You have a place to put them in. And if you don't have a place for it, so what are you going to do? So you have a lot. So what? It's not going to be mitkayem. So it's impressive right now, but come in 2 months and see what's happening. No, well, so actually, it is really in chronology is the other way around. It has to be a Torah that's learned with sincerity, but that Torah Lishma itself brings you also to Yirat Shamayim, right? How does the Braita go that the whole Mesilas Yesharim is founded on the Braita of Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair? The Torah meviya lidei zehirut, zehirut meviya lidei zirisut, and so to nikiyut and so on. And then Yirat Chet is one of the very last ones that brings a person eventually a kedusha and Yirat Chet and Tchiyat HaMitim. So the Torah is the core element that the connection with Hashem brings, that Ha'ma'or shebah machsiro le'mu'tav, that the light of kedusha that's in the Torah, when a person learns it with sincerity, with dedication. I've got to know this. Yes, I need to know the Torah. That brings the person to genuine levels of Yirat Shamayim. So that concludes Perek Dalet. We're going to start Perek Hey in the next shiur. Chazak u'Baruch.